Today we are going to see how to create this anime water splash. This is something I always wanted to show you guys, and today is the day. I have another video about a waterfall, in case you are interested, links somewhere. This is all possible thanks to the amazing support I get from my patrons, where I make all of these projects and assets available for you to download and use, links below. So, without further ado, let's jump right into this. And if you look closely, you will notice that we need a few meshes. In this case, I actually used 4 different meshes. But before jumping into mesh creation, let's start with the shader. So, in Unity, in a folder with right click on create, let's go to shader graph. In URP, you can create a lit shader graph or an unlit shader graph. The first one will be influenced by the lights and the second won't be influenced by the lights. I'm gonna go with unlit shader graph and rename it to anime water shader, for example, and then double click to open it up. Let me just dock here shader graph. Alright, let me push the main preview up here so we can focus on how it's looking as we make the shader. And we can think of this as 2 layers, one for the bottom, the base color, and then another one for the top layer, which is for the Voronoi. So let's start there. Let's start with 2 colors, one for the base color, and the other one for the main text color, which is the color to be applied to the main text, to a texture. On the base color, we can say the mode it's HDR in case you want to make this super bright, which I doubt it, but yeah. And for the default color, we can already select a bluish color and then increase the alpha to 100, and that's it. For the main text, we can do the same, HDR, but it's gonna be white with 100 for the alpha. Right, so if we have a main text color, supposedly we need a main texture, right? Let's create a texture 2D and call it the main text. And I'm gonna assign this Voronoi texture. Again, you can assign any texture, you can try and see how it looks. I made this texture available for you for free, links below by the way. And once you assign it to the main text, you can then sample this texture, which means we are going to have access to the RGBA values, which also means we can multiply with the main text color. And if we push all of this a little bit back, we can add the base color. In this case, the bluish color that looks like water. I'm just gonna say the surface type on the graph settings now is transparent. Alpha indeed. And turn on alpha clipping. And then turn on support VFX Graph in case you want to use this with VFX Graph, which we are going to use later. And then let's connect this to the base color. Now we have the alpha and alpha clip threshold. On the main preview, we can switch this to a cylinder in case that helps you visualize the water falling that we are going to create. And to the alpha, we are going to connect the previous node, this one right here. And yeah, as you can see, it's already clipping because alpha clip threshold is above 0. It's at 0.5. If you decrease it to 0, we get the full shader. So this is a value that's going to be useful to control, which means we can create a float on the properties panel for the clip, and it's going to be a slider, the mode, between 0 and 1. As default, let's leave it at 0 and let's connect it right here. Great. Another thing super useful is to control how this texture is going to be tiled. If we want to stretch it in the X or in the Y, and we can do that back here. When we sample this main texture, we have a UV input, and there is a tiling and offset node in Unity, very useful one, where we already have the tiling and the offset. As you can see, tiling stretches the texture however we want. It's a useful property, so let's create a vector 2 in this case and call it main text tiling. And then another one, another vector 2 for the main text speed. You will see why in a moment. Main text tiling, default value of 1 and 1 on the X and Y, and we can connect it right here. And the offset property we have here allows us to pan this, to scroll this, to move our texture, creating that cool effect of motion. And that's when the main text speed is going to be useful, because if we create a time node, and multiply that with our main text speed, with our vector 2, and then connect to the offset, what we will get is the ability to animate our text, to move our texture, to pan it. Cool. So now that we can erode our texture, tile it however we want, and scroll it up and down or to the sides, let's see this in action in a cylinder. And like I said, we need a few meshes. They are extremely simple. If you have Blender around, I can show you how to create them. On a new Blender file, what I'm gonna do is select everything with A and press delete. We want a clean scene, and then with Shift A or up there on the Add button, we want to create a cylinder. And without moving anything on this bottom left panel, we can say the cap fill type is nothing. So we don't have the top and bottom faces. With this cylinder, we can enter in edit mode with Tab, select everything with A, and with G, we are going to move it on the Z axis. You can press Z, a value of 1. You can press 1 and then enter, and it goes up. And finally, in Object, we can say the shade is smooth, so we don't see the faces. And then we can rename it to Cylinder Water, for example, something like that. With our cylinder selected, let's go to File and in Export, let's select FBX and navigate to our project. I'm gonna save this to the Models folder, turn on Selected Objects and Export FBX. Right, so in Unity all we gotta do is select the texture and increase the scale factor to 100 and then press Apply. And with right click, I'm gonna create an empty object, reset its transform. I'm gonna move it a value of 7 in the X so it's centered with the camera. But essentially, in a folder we can, with right click, create a visual effect graph. I'm gonna rename it to VFX Graph _anim water _tutorial, for example, and parent this to the empty we just created. Just make sure that it's 0, 0 in the position, and then press the edit button to open visual effect graph. Let me hide this panel, and yeah, we need one cylinder to live continuously, only one, not this many particles. So on the spawn section up there, we can add a single burst of only one particle, remove the constant spawn rate. I'm actually going to disable auto compile and auto reinitialize, so it isn't always compiling every time I make a change. And this also doesn't need to move, it's going to be static. What's going to move is the shader. So let's remove the velocity. And cool thing, by the way, if you want this to live forever, you can delete the set lifetime and it will live forever. Down here we don't need the output particle quad, as a matter of fact we need the output particle mesh. Since it's going to be for a mesh for the cylinder, we can already rename it to cylinder, exactly, and then in the mesh section add the cylinder we just created in Blender, and we can already assign our shader graph. If you don't see this option, you can go to Edit and in Preference, in Visual Effects, turn on Experimental Operator /blocks. You might need to restart Unity to see this in action, but once you have this shader graph option, you can assign the shader we created, this one. And let's already take care of the size with a set size. Let's say it's 1, but more importantly, let's use a set scale so we can squeeze it in the X and Y to a value of 0.5 and stretch it in the Z to a value of 5. And now if we compile this, we have our cylinder. It is laying down on the ground, probably taking a nap, but all we gotta do now is rotate it, and we can do it up there in initialize particle with a set angle. With -90 in the X, compile it again. As a matter of fact, let's already replace this main texture. It is the Voronoi one that we want, which is available to download on the link below, by the way. And let's compile this so we can see it in action. Yeah, here we go. We need to make a few adjustments, but it's a good starting point. From there, with the properties that we have, we can say that tiling the X, it's going to repeat more often, 1.5, and in the Y, it's going to repeat less, 0.33, for example, a third. It seems like it's super squeezed, but it's because of a reason. Let's make it scroll, by the way. On the main text speed on the Y, we can say it's 0.5, and here we go. It's falling water. Another property super useful in our shader is to control how much of this Voronoi we want. How intense it is, how present we want it to be. We can do it after we'll multiply with the main text color right here. You can connect this to a power node. Replace this connection to the base color and replace the connection to the alpha as well, very important. Then we can control this with a float and call it the main text power with the default value of 1. I'm gonna connect it right here, push the property up there, and save this shader. Back on VFX Graph, we have this main text power, which is super useful. Let me just compile this first. And as you can see, it's basically dissolving the texture, it's controlling its intensity. And we don't want that much. We want 1.6 for example. It was a little bit too persistent. This is also taking in consideration our next step, which is to add a new layer to this. I'm gonna call this the sander inside because we are going to have a layer outside. I'm gonna push this a little bit to the left and with Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V create a duplicate of this output particle and lit mesh and call it the sander outside. I'm gonna drag a line from there, connect it, alright. And let's imagine that this layer has a bigger radius. This sander 0.52 for the X and Y will do just fine. Let me compile this. You won't see any difference at all because they have the exact same properties. And I'm gonna clip them and you won't still see no difference. But once I start playing with the tiling, I'm gonna say it's gonna be even more squeezed, 2.3 in the X and 1.6 in the Y. You can start to see something. And you can adjust the clipping, how much clipping we want, as you can see. I'm just gonna increase the speed. It's a bit slow, 0.6, yeah, 0.7, yeah, okay. And then we have the main text power. If you decrease it, you see even more of this second layer, which adds a really nice touch and makes it look like an anime water. So this is the core of the effect and it's essentially done. Obviously, I have added a lot of details. I'm gonna show you a few more. For example, let's create the puddles, which will give you a pretty cool idea on how to create waves. In this case, we need a mesh, a circle. Let's go back to Blender. With Shift A, I'm gonna add a new cylinder. Again, make sure the cap fill type is nothing. And the trick is to enter in edit mode with tab. Select all of these vertices at the top. And with S, we're going to scale it down to 0. You can literally type 0 and then enter. And still with the same selection, let's push them down with G only on the Z axis, a value of -1, and then press enter. Let's now only select the bottom edge loop and push it up with G, a value of 1. And here we go, we have a circle. I'm gonna get out of edit mode and in object, select shade smooth and rename this to circle water, for example 01. The idea with this trick is to, here's an example, since we have this outside edge loop, on the UVs it represents the bottom part. Which means that if we scroll this texture up and down, this is how it is mapped by the way to the circle, the texture itself, we create this wave effect, this very nice motion. It's a pretty cool trick. But if you look closely, there's a few artifacts, so the way we fix it is with Ctrl R in edit mode. We are going to scroll up until we add 3 edge loops, and then press enter and that's it. And now let's export these in File, Edit, FBX, rename it, turn on selected objects and export it. Back in Unity, all we gotta do is say the scale factor is 100, and then press apply. And a very easy way to apply this is to select these nodes, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V to duplicate this system. And this output now is gonna be for the circle we created. We can assign the mesh. We can remove the set scale. Set size, it's enough, and we can say it's random between 4.5 and 5. And let's already take care of the way it grows with the set size over life. We can select this diagonal line and say the last key it slows down a little bit the handle. Oh, let's make sure the composition is multiply, otherwise it overwrites the set size. Let's compile this, and yeah, it's huge and it's on top of the cylinder. And that's mostly happening because if we select our VFX graph in the project folder, on the inspector we can rearrange them. We just need first to rename this one to ripples, so we can distinguish it here and then push it all the way to the top. And now it's gonna be rendered before everything, before the sander. Let's compile this and here we go. Very interesting effect. But we have the clip option, and that's what we are gonna use to create these ripples around 0.25 more or less. And then we can play with the main text styling, 3 for the X and 0.5. And maybe it could be scrolling slower, 0.25. Yeah, that looks more interesting. And the main text, you can adjust how much it's showing with this property, the main text power, and with the clip as well. Right, I'm gonna leave it more or less with these values, and now the only thing I'm gonna do is add set lifetime to this random between 3 and 5 seconds. And then in the spawn, let's use a constant spawn rate of around 1, so we have a few ripples that keep on spawning. You could leave it as it was, but I think this way it looks a little bit more interesting. And now in the set angle we can say it's random. The X is still gonna be minus 90, but the Y is gonna be between 360 and minus 360. And now the idea is to use the clip to fade this out instead of disappearing out of nowhere. We can do it, which is another cool trick, with a sample curve. For the time, now we can use age over lifetime, since we have lifetime up there. And for the curve, we can start with this one, and then connect it to the clip, compile this, and see how it looks. It's basically going to erode to clip everything at the end of its lifetime. We might need to make a few adjustments. For example, if you open this curve now, you can see in real time what's going on. If I push this first key to more or less around here, here we go. This is the kind of effect we create. We are eroding more in the beginning. Cool, right? You can adjust it however you want. One last thing that I want to show you is how to cover that hard edge between the sander and the ripples. Once again, we need a new mesh, a very simple one. So in Blender, with Shift A, I'm gonna add a new cylinder, and I'm gonna isolate it. Make sure cap fill type is nothing, by the way. Let's already turn on Shade Smooth. Let's enter in edit mode with tab, and with Ctrl R we are gonna scroll up until we have 3 edge loops. And now let's select everything with S and scale it down only in the Z, a value of 0.5. And now let's make sure we have proportional editing on. With this curve, this will influence the vertices around our selection. Let's select the top and the bottom edge loop and scale it down with S, just like this, small value. That's enough, and it's done. We can simply rename it to full ring water, for example. Weird names, I know, but that's how it is, and export as an FBX. Rename it, turn on selected objects only, and go back to Unity to say the scale factor is 100, press apply. And now we can, with Ctrl C and Ctrl V, copy the ripples system. This one is going to be for full ring at the base. And we can assign our full ring water as the mesh. We probably won't see much at the beginning, we will compile in a moment. For now, let's say the set size is not random. Let's turn it off with a value of 1, because we want to use the scale. This set scale is going to be random, between a value of 0.5 in the X and Y, 0.6 in the Z, and then 1.2 in the Z, and 0.7 in the X and Y. Just like this. Let's compile it, and yeah, like I was saying, we probably won't see it, but that's mostly because it's running below everything. Let's select VFX Graph in the project and push it all the way down so it's rendered after everything. Compile it, and yeah, we see something. Yeah, it's there. It's very small, but it's there. It's mostly because of the main text styling. These values are extremely important to get it right. I'm gonna give you mines because I've already tested them, but for example, it's 0.55 for the X and 0.65 for the Y, with no scrolling and the main text power around 0.4. And here we go. Oh yeah, we need to adjust a few things. Down here, this curve, it can be straight, but it should start at 0.5, so it doesn't start really small. And the lifetime, something much quicker like 0.5 and 0.6. Let's increase the capacity to 256 and say the constant spawn rate is 20. We want a lot of this happening fast. Let's compile this and here we go. We have some, yeah, it's small in the set size. 1.5 should do the trick. And here we go. We have fixed that hard edge between the cylinder and the ocean or the ripples, whatever you want to call it. And now we have something to disguise that little problem. Essentially in games, the cake is a lie. Never forget that. So that's essentially what I can show you. Remember, this original one took hours to do. I made it available on my Patreon's page and you will learn a lot, like really a lot. Plus you support me. And there's many more assets you can get from there. And I'm giving you this part for free. I hope you can improve on top of that or support me on my Patreon page and get the project and study from there. That would be awesome. Talking about patrons, I want to say thank you to each one that supported me last month. And a quick shout out to the top tier patrons, which are Alberto Segeris, Alan Alstead, Aviad Tobali, Cyber Cradle, Daniel Schmidt, Dark Kingdom, Diego Mark, Frosty40, Grub Lab, Jarrett Billy, Roland Salazar, Casey Miller, Leon Holt, Lutuli, Matt Mohorn, Mike Bell, Matt Sims, Nikolai Yalnazov, Oitsk, Pradeep Sen, Radioactive Bullfrog, Revenant Games, RVR, Sean Aguilar, Teen, Travis McCollum, Verisuta, Whatever Marta, Will Perlian, Zoya Kanash, Lizina Seru, Tonakato, Xiam Qianlin, and Mi-Jane Kim. Thank you all for your support, you guys are amazing. And you keep this channel going. I hope you have all enjoyed this video and I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.